Make sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell if you like news and reviews. Let's discuss this. So Starfield was delayed until early 2023, and I'm going to give you 3 reasons why it matters a little bit, but probably is not that unexpected. Now, if you watch the podcast, you absolutely know we've been talking about this for a while, and the expectations were that it was going to be delayed. We started to see some leaks. Xbox has their event in June, the massive Xbox event. We're going to have all these different companies showing their different games at this event, basically a recreation of E3 if it's just for Xbox. Why not announce this at that point? We'll give you a couple reasons. The first, not to sour the mood. While it is true that going into this event now has Starfield's delay hanging over its head, Microsoft has a number of titles from their other studios to show and will likely not only show Starfield anyway to keep people understanding how short the delay really is and get that talk to continue. They'll probably continue to show it pretty much exactly the same way. The other is that these leaks were starting to come out about issues around the game. Now, leaks are a dime a dozen. Sources are unconfirmed. NDAs are seemingly ignored because everybody wants you to listen to their brand new big source on the street Spotify podcast. However, if a major story was going to be prepped and announced, it now gets this out before the event and before press breaks it. This, of course, makes sense. It is a Thursday, which was a surprising day for a lot of people for this kind of news to be broken at this time. But if you had a major story coming out, then getting out in front of it is really what works. Additionally, I want to talk about a rumor that was floating around that most of MS Studios had something to submit to Microsoft for their upcoming June event. That is actually ignoring that that's literally how it works every single time, unless you are really in a lull. And that rumor isn't as much of a rumor as a firm statement of how it actually already works. It does remind us, though, that Microsoft has things to show regardless of how close or far out they may be, and they just adjust their showcase accordingly. This is also ignoring that showing for Starfield and cutting that down doesn't make a lot of sense because of the short delay. I still expect us to see a good deal of Starfield shown in this event. Now, people are always going to question how much was going to be shown. If it's a shorter discussion, they might think that, oh, this is because of the delay. We'll never truly know. But these are the things that I hear whenever I'm talking to developers about how they show things and all the stuff that can happen within the industry. Now, if you've watched closely also, Bethesda's handled Starfield in a unique way, but in a way I want to explain to you guys. While most of the time they have some kind of tracked announcement and show schedule that you can somewhat glean onto, especially in how they handled their AAA titles, I think that expecting a pattern is a bit foolish. And let me describe this. These are big games coming out years apart by Bethesda. PR, the business, their own company, changed hands. Easily, in that amount of time, massive changes have occurred between their last big game and this one, or in this case, having E3, then digital E3, then no E3, then the Game Awards, and now a Microsoft event. Just wholly being bought by Microsoft and joining companies like Obsidian is massive enough, but a lot of people are forgetting that the entire tides of the industry change in the amount of time that Bethesda does announce or show something. So adjusting things, as well as their successes and failures in the past, such as Fallout 76, makes sense. It's how the world adjusts and revolves around those adjustments. We can't expect the same when not going into the same situation. That's like a football team not improving their passing game in the last 2 decades. You have to change with the times. And changing with the times brings me to the largest part of this, which is the time frames of games. A couple months. This can seem very odd to people. November slip into the first quarter of 2023. What exactly is happening? Especially with Bethesda doing some behind the scenes videos, the art videos, and many others. Something that I actually found to be an excellent way to sort of drum up excitement, not only by the typical diehard gamer of Bethesda fans, but also people who are interested in those tangential bits that don't usually get discussed in games. Let's take a quick look at something though. The dam burst this year in the early months. We can all say it. Remember that companies are always watching this stuff. Every single company is looking at every single other company and how they release things, how the games work, what the economy is in the nations that they're going to release, how the ecosystems have changed, how digital stores have changed. Elden Ring, Forbidden West, and many others smashed into the early months of the year like gangbusters. This early year provided not only amazing games, but they sold well. A number of high-selling surprise games also, if you look at that list, and probably fit into the AA and indie market, and certainly into other unique markets. There's a number of reasons for this, including that the budgets of gamers don't usually see any kind of real dents in those first couple months, and certainly not from so many excellent titles, or at the very least, a plethora of choices. But especially in the last 2 to 3 years, we've seen a lot of amazing games released in this time frame. Even removing any of the huge titles from that time period still shows a massive, robust desire from gamers to invest heavily in the first quarter of the year, especially when it comes to big game releases. Companies see that, publishers notice it, and developers want to develop towards it. So for somebody looking at the industry like myself, this is a delay of a couple months into what has now proven itself to be one of the most viable times for game releases in a year, and should continually be noticed by gamers moving forward, as well as developers and publishers. And lastly, I just got to get this out. It's unfortunate, but I got to mention it. Cyberpunk. Bear with me. I apologize. I'm going to talk about it just for a second. There are a couple leaks and a couple of things that I've talked about in the past couple months where I'd stated that the developers I talked to were dropping Cyberpunk as a name of a game that they don't want to be compared to for any kind of issues within their titles. All developers, whether primary, secondary, tertiary, remote, it doesn't matter. They look at the gaming industry, the releases, and how things work out, and how they do when a situation involves one of the largest companies in video game history with a very lauded historical gameplay release library. They do look at the game industry and releases and how those things work out. They do it when a situation involves one of the largest companies and the issues that may have occurred with a title with a tremendous IP, such as Cyberpunk. It sold well, absolutely. But for a title like that, there were a lot of difficulties up front. Nobody wants to be remembered for that. There's an old adage about the delayed game is delayed once and a bad game is bad forever. It's not necessarily true. We see No Man's Sky and many others fixing issues at launch, but no gamer should want that. No game developer should aim for that, and certainly no publisher should hope that that'll make them money over the long run. We talk about No Man's Sky, but almost everyone that you talk to gets that wistful feeling like old war vets talking about shared times, where someone sits back in their old recliner with a bit of tea and says, "Remember No Man's Sky?" And everyone gets a bit teary-eyed having lived through that initial release. That's not what a lot of people want. They would have all loved to have No Man's Sky in that middle ground, past the initial release, maybe prior to all this amazing content. And No Man's Sky is not a single example. There are tons of examples of games that have fixed themselves, but that is not a sustainable way in which we want to deliver games to game players. It doesn't make any sense, not financially, and certainly not with the developers who are already having their issues with burnout and crunch. And this fall is not without some big blockbusters. God of War 2, we know is coming, or at least they haven't delayed it yet. And of course, you have Hogwarts. There's some other games that haven't been announced. But for a lot of people, when you look at Starfield, it was a unique situation already, an exclusive on a series of systems that not everybody owned, and something that had sort of transitioned the entire industry towards this separation of these two big platforms, Sony and Microsoft on the other side. But Bethesda doesn't delay their games, some people will say. Well, now they do. And in the same way that a pattern was created to count the games that they didn't delay, now you have your first of the big ones that they did. It's interesting because I love games, and I love talking about them, and I love you guys. Maybe not all of you. Maybe like 50%. Max would be 40%. All right. Absolute max, though. About 35% of you. I love 35%. If you get a chance, subscribe. If you don't want to subscribe. Peace out. Check out the Patreon. And subscribe.